All right, hello everyone. Why don't we get started? And I'm sure others will be joining us, but we really want this to be have the feel of an open office hours around how to do remote learning with your elementary students using ListenWise. So I want to invite you at the very beginning to get into our chat box and tell us who you are, how much you've used ListenWise, how familiar you are with remote or distance learning. The chat box is going to be the best place to go to ask your questions so that Jim and I can answer them through the course of this 30-minute webinar. And we will extend it if you have more questions and time. We're able to hang around. We wanted to keep it tight. We know you're busy. You've got a lot of things going on, a lot of things on your plate. So we wanted to keep it tight at 30 minutes, but know that we can stay a little longer, and we really look forward to hearing your questions. So let me just introduce myself. Hi, everyone. I'm Monica Brady-Myerov. I'm the founder and CEO of ListenWise, and we're a listening skills building platform. And I'm standing here in this picture with my co-presenter today, Jim Bentley. He's a fifth grade teacher from California. Do you want to say hi, Jim?
Hello, how's everybody doing? Thanks for joining us this afternoon or this evening, depending upon your time zone.
That's right. Evening here on the East Coast. I'm in Boston, and Jim is in California. All right, so today's agenda. So what we're going to be doing is talking a little bit about how to access ListenWise in a remote setting, and then how to use it for remote learning. We're going to hear some really direct stories from Jim, who's been doing it with his students. Jim Bentley has been using ListenWise in his classroom and has seamlessly made the transition to remote learning and can give us some tips and tricks. And then we really want to rely on your reflections and questions. So as I said, jump into that chat box, tell us where you are, what you want to know, what you're interested in learning, and we will help you out. So I know some of you might not be familiar with ListenWise at all, so I'll start by just saying we're a listening skills building company that uses public radio, NPR stories, and podcasts to help students be engaged with the content that they're learning in science, social studies, and ELA, as well as practice good listening skills. So jumping first into how to get on ListenWise. So what's great about ListenWise is that you can use it on any device. It is an HTML5 program. And actually, before I even go to that, I'm feeling like we're going to be jumping around a lot onto the web as well, because I just feel like what's important is for you to see it and log in as I'm doing now. So anyone can get onto ListenWise and sign up for a free extended use during the coronavirus. And I'm already signed in, so I'm just going to jump to one of the home pages for currents. And you can see that we are updating current events every school day. We also have a huge bank of lessons that you can choose from in science, social studies, and ELA. And we have a special collection for elementary students that's very new to us. So we have just added a beta collection, really, and I know many of you, I hope, have joined us, are in our beta pilot for 2 through 5 in our collection. So we'll be looking at that more deeply. But that's just to give you a quick idea of what ListenWise is. Again, if you're not familiar with us, get on right now, sign up for free, and you'll get it while your school is closed throughout this crisis. So first thing I wanted to do is jump back to the presentation and really address some of the issues around just technology, because I know like right now you are all under so much strain, and a lot is being put on you to help figure out how to address all your students' needs, and how can you do this in a remote setting where not everybody has the same access and the same devices. So I think that it can be helpful if you're using ListenWise that it is accessible on all these different devices, including a mobile device. The audio is streaming, which is not on your bandwidth, but it is able to be accessed in all different types of devices. The next thing I want to tell you about, and this is just sort of like how to get up and running with ListenWise, is that it integrates with Google Classroom. So once you sign up for a ListenWise account, you can roster your students using Google Classroom. With importing that roster is so easy. You can do assignment sharing and grade integration. But if you're a Google school and you're using Google Classroom, it's a really, really easy way to do it. So the first thing we recommend when you're starting out with ListenWise is creating classes, because the platform is designed for teachers or parents, and I imagine there are parents on this on this. I'd be interested to see whether any of you, I'm just peeking in the chat now to see how many of you might be parents, but whether you're a parent or a teacher, it starts by creating a class. So once you have access to Listenwise, the way you're going to best reach your students remotely is to create a class. And you can, as I said, import your roster from Google Classroom, or you'll just see at the classes tab at the top of Listenwise to create a class, enroll your students by giving them a code that you get once you create a class. And then your students log into that class by going to listenwise.com/students using the code. And then that allows you to assign students current events, lessons, quizzes, all the things we're going to talk about today. So I kind of wanted to just go through first this, the actual nuts and bolts of getting onto the system and how you set up for success to be able to interact with your students on the Listenwise platform and also track their progress with listening quizzes or assignments should you choose to give them. So now let's move on to just how to actually use the platform in a remote setting. So these are going to be some practical strategies for getting started. So we know remote learning is new to a lot of you teachers, you all, and you don't need to try to do everything at once. So what I want to do in this office hours is, again, I want to answer your questions. So let me know what specific questions you have, and I want to give you a lot of easy ways to engage as well. So one quick and easy way is by using our share link. Engagement is really, I think, the hardest thing that might be for students when they're remote. I know this is true for my children. I can see it with them. They are tempted by games and friends and everything on their phone and around the house that will pull them away from learning. So your role and the bar is so much higher, it seems like, in remote learning to find something engaging and interesting for your students to listen to. So finding a great story is probably the hardest thing. And actually, why don't, Jim, you talk a little bit about how it's going for you in the remote learning transition while we pull up the website and get this going.
Absolutely. In fact, while I was just 2 minutes before we were getting ready to jump on, I shared my first remote learning weird news piece with students, and I found it. It's called Earth Sandwich, and literally with the share audio button, it's a matter of clicking it and then selecting your Google Classroom with your Google account, and it's super simple. I know Greg or somebody had mentioned in the chat, what the integration's like. It's very, very seamless, very simple. And making sure that you have your class rostered and updated to Listenwise is a huge help. So it takes a lot of steps out for me.
Okay, that's great. All right, now I was dumped out of my earlier web window, but now I've found it. So I'm going to go back and show you that story that Jim just mentioned, weird news for the sandwich. What I want you to notice here is this share audio button, because this is the easiest way to share an audio link with your students, and it does bypass you having to make classes and create assignments and share through the platform. This just gives you a link for any story on the platform. And you can share it directly, that link, through Google Classroom, or you can copy and paste it and put it into a Google Doc or an email or however you'd like to do it. We'll come back and listen to this one in a minute, but I just wanted to show you that these links are on every single story that is on Listenwise. So remember to go to the right-hand side and just share that audio link, and that pops up where you can grab it and send it to your students. So that is just a really quick and easy way to find something to use on Listenwise.
And if I could add to that just briefly, if anyone's out there using Flipgrid, if you were to drop that link into a Flipgrid, students could listen, they could have a conversation asynchronously using Flipgrid as well, which is another way to build that engagement, and they're listening and then they're interacting with their peers virtually.
So let me go a little deeper then into one of these examples of what you have in a Listenwise story and why adding listening in a remote setting is more than just holding their attention, but it's also a literacy tool, because every single story on Listenwise does have an interactive transcript. So I'm going to play that feature for you right now, and you'll see that the transcript stays in sync with the audio.
More than 5,000 years ago, a woman in Scandinavia chewed on a piece of birch, a rudimentary chewing gum of sorts, that, as NPR's Merritt Kennedy.
So you can see that the students can follow along reading. And this is a research-proven approach to literacy, in helping improve comprehension, improve retention, and also help English language learners with spelling and academic language and the way the language sounds. It's just such a great resource for so many different types of students. The other thing I'll point out is that you can also slow down the audio. Do you see over here to the right, original and slower? So this goes 20% slower. So again, for students who are still learning English or those who are struggling to read and it just needs to go a hair slower, that is a great resource to use. So I think what I'm going to do now is focus, because somebody was just asking about that transcript. So we are taking a peek at your questions and we want to answer them. We want this to be as much of a back and forth as possible with so many people on board, but we also want to give you some actionable things you can use with your elementary students. So I'm going to go back to all current events and show you one really, really cool feature we recently added, and that is this weird news feature. And Jim was just talking about one called the Weird News Earth Sandwich. And these stories are really short, easy to digest. They'll keep students' attention, and they're just great to use to focus on vocabulary. The story itself is only 30 seconds long. So we pull out a couple of the vocabulary words in the story, and we give you, under the Assignment Resources tab, a couple questions to ask them. 2 are focused on listening comprehension, using those words, coordinate, do you see? And also latitude and longitude, so that students can start to digest these new vocabulary words as they're listening to this story. And because it's only 30 seconds long, you can listen multiple times. So let's listen through once. And then, Jim, I want to hear how this went over in your class.
Good morning, I'm Rachel Martin. With 2 slices of bread, you can make a sandwich out of just about anything. So 2 men, one in New Zealand and one in Spain, decided to make one out of everything. Using latitude and longitude, sandwich dudes Etienne Naud and Angel Sierra coordinated an Earth sandwich. The idea isn't exactly new, but the BBC reports not all examples have been bona fide opposite point endeavors. Just further proof a good sandwich knows no borders.
Jim, how did your students like that one?
This is a great story, and it sparks conversation. Of course, there's the ability to add questions. Some questions are already with it, but the really cool thing, and I dropped it in the chat, is that if you take a story like this with an antipodes map, which I'd never heard of until like a year or 2 ago, it basically tells you, if you picture the Earth, it tells you where one place is opposite the other. And this little antipodes map that's in the chat, it shows a person kind of peeking through and their head disappears in the Earth, and then their head pops out on the other side. So it's cool to get kids thinking about a simple story like this with 2 slices of bread and a couple of people being creative, and then thinking about this entire planet, this sphere on which we live. It was really a wonderful discussion piece.
That's great. You mentioned that you can create an assignment. So I'm going to click on that orange bar you saw at the top right called Create Assignment. All of the current events and the lessons have this ability to create an assignment, which means you're going to digitally assign the students the listening as well as the questions. But you might only want to use one question, and you may want to add things to your question. So you can even add your own question. So it's very flexible. So especially for elementary age students, you might want to just focus on one question, and you might even tell them to draw a picture, something that's more, appropriate to their age level. It's a very flexible system, and it allows you to just give your instructions directly to the students, save it, and now you're ready to assign it either to the whole class, or you can also assign it to just a few students. So it's a super easy way to quickly make that assignment and push it out to students. Okay.
And too, Monica, just to add on with the Antipodes map link, I dropped that into one of the questions and then had a question based on that. So, what's opposite where you are in the world. So you can use it as a question tool, or also even as a kind of as a statement tool for students to notice as they're going through the questions.
That is a great idea. Thanks for sharing that. Now we're just going to look at what that assignment looks like. So top, this is how you monitor your assignment. And I could see I've assigned 2 students this weird news segment. And then below, I see what my students are going to see. And they can see the transcript. They can slow the audio. And if you'll notice here too, there's this toolbar that pops up. This is a great It's a text help toolbar. It's like a mini screen reader, so that if you have students who need to maybe have something defined or read out loud, you can click on this and it will give you the dictionary of the word sandwich, the translation into Spanish, and even a picture dictionary. And that can also read out loud. So if you've got students who also need to hear things more read out loud, you can press
Listen
play
to hear
here.
about two men.
So that screen reader bar pops up in the student preview. So you won't see it when you're assigning things, but you will be able to make sure that your students see it, and that's what's important. So let's hop on over to lessons, actually, and I want to answer one of the questions that popped up in the chat box, and it was one I was going to get to, but might as well get to this right away, which is search. Okay, so you've got elementary students. You want to find what's appropriate to them, because this platform is grades 2 through 12. So you definitely want to take control of the types of stories you're going to send to your students, as well as this Lexile audio measure. This is a really new feature that is part of, it's come out from Metametrics, the same ones who brought you the text measure, and it allows the ability to measure the audio input. So this is an indicator of the complexity of the audio passage. So it's associated with the listening comprehension challenge of the passage. So how hard will this be for my students to listen to? And if you want even more description and understanding of that so you can make the right selection for your elementary students, click on that little bar that has a question mark. And you're going to get a lot of guidance on what is considered a low listening audio range, medium, and high, as well as recommended grade level bands. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the Lexile reading text measure, the Lexile text measure and the Lexile reading measure. Well, this is the brand new Lexile audio measure. Jim, have you been looking at this and using it?
Yeah, Lexile is something that I've been using a lot with our adopted curriculum and other resources that I use for reading as well. And it's been a huge help for me to figure out what's appropriate and for whom.
Yeah, so what you can do is you can make a screen on what's appropriate by either clicking a box, and that will set the bar for you, or you can actually do the slider as well and be more specific. So for now, let's just screen low, and I want elementary level stories, and we're going to look at the lessons. Now, all of our elementary lessons have a quiz as well, so I'm going to just add with a quiz, and I'm going to refine the search like that. All right, so now you can see that that box pops up on any story that you look at. So you can decide, well, this story about bees and pollinators is a 430. That's on the lower end of the Lexile audio measure scale, so that might be good for my second graders. And then this science of tickling is on the higher end. That might be a little better for my fourth graders. So it's just a good way to guide. Now, this is different from the Lexile text measure, although they can be used together to deepen understanding of the relationship between students' listening comprehension and reading comprehension. But I think what you need to remember here in this new measure is that students can listen 2 to 3 grade levels higher than they can read. So that is what is so exciting to me about this new level, is that you can stretch your students' ability to capture academic vocabulary and learn new concepts and background information while challenging them with a higher listening level than they would be able to read. So why don't we go to the example of, I'm just going to put in bird because I want to show that story. And I know you've used this as well with your students, Jim. And I want to show what a elementary lesson looks like. So we showed you briefly a current event, a short current event, and then a longer one with the DNA and the chewing gum. But what we're looking at now is a lesson, and you'll see that it has a few more tabs with teacher resources. So like the other stories, it has the transcript with the audio. And then in the assignment resources tab, you've got a bank of listening comprehension questions that are written at the age appropriate level for your students, as well as discussion themes, which you can, again, put these into a Google chat. You could have a Zoom conversation about it. You could ask your students to listen to this story as a family and discuss it with their parents. It includes vocabulary and then 2 different listening organizers, which you can assign online. One is a T-chart, and the other is this language identification organizer. This is a metacognitive strategy to just help students like focus in as they're listening, so they tick off the phrase as they hear them. And then in this tab, Teacher's Guide, we really walk you through a lesson. Now, this is taking it a next step. So I'm trying to give some graduated ways of difficulty of using ListenWise. One is you can always just share this audio. There's that button up there I told you about. Just share the audio, have your students enjoy it. Encourage them to look up what the birds look like that are mentioned in the story. Have them draw a picture about what they saw. If you want to go deeper, you can activate their prior knowledge before listening, follow our directions what to do during listening, which is using one of those two organizers, and after listening. And then there are standards. I know somebody mentioned that in the chat box. All of our lessons are aligned to the standards in all 50 states. So right now, if you're on the extended free use for ListenWise as a single teacher, you're going to be seeing the Common Core US standards. If you're in a school that is piloting the elementary curriculum, or you're having a larger adoption at your school to try it out, you're most likely going to be seeing your state standards. And I do want to let you know that if you are a single teacher and you're thinking, wow, wait a second, this would be great for my whole team, email me, monica@listenwise.com, and we can switch you over to a school account. We'll get you your state standards, and we'll give you a code for your whole school to use. Now, the last thing here I want to show before I turn it over to you, Jim, and play a little bit of this and then hear how it went, is this quiz. This is another really, really easy thing to do with your students, is have them listen and take the multiple choice auto-scored listening quiz. So this bar right here assigns the quiz. In a few simple steps, you can preview it with or without the transcript. I think at the elementary age, like keeping the transcript there is so great as they're still developing their reading skills. Let's listen to a little bit of this at the top so you can hear how entertaining and engaging it is.
Let me set the scene. It was a Tuesday morning. I had just finished my daily kung fu routine when I went outside to fill my bird feeder. I've got a ton of feathered friends who frequent my yard, and they get a little grumpy if I forget their breakfast. I was just hanging the feeder back up in a tree when this strange little bird flew overhead. It was small and yellow, but that wasn't the weird part. Here's what confused me. Something was sticky.
I love the sound of the story and the stories, especially in the elementary. We are sourcing them from podcasts that are made especially for young people. And they just are so engaging with the sounds. You feel like you're outdoors. You can practically see the bird tweeting. It's very engaging. Our content comes from National Public Radio. It also comes from local stations and a variety of podcasters. But in the elementary curriculum in particular, it is more younger focused, and these stories are made for younger listeners. So just to show you that the quiz is something you would take and go through quickly, looking at what is the main point, what is the best meaning of the phrase, that's a vocabulary question, inferencing, these are what we're looking at, detail recall, and then at the very end, you're able to submit the quiz, and the student, the student can see how well they did right away. Again, in a remote learning situation, this is a great tool because the student can have immediate feedback on how well they did. And then you as a teacher are also able to see in your classes how the student did by looking at class summary report of all the quizzes that have been taken, as well as the one that was just taken. So Jim, I know you've used this one with your students. How did they like it? What did they react to?
You know, they were really impressed with just the sounds, the feel of the story, the content of it, you know, bird migrations and how they move. The science was there, but it was a narrative experience, and really narrative memories are kind of gifted because we're programmed to understand narrative. So they were highly engaged. It was also kind of fun. Some kids wanted to, you know, sit with their eyes closed or their head in their desk or something, sit back and just kind of take it in. We always listen once for the gist, and then we kind of listen again, getting a little bit more in depth. The T chart, the language identification chart, really, really awesome tools to use to really make sure that they're hearing what's being said. So yeah, this was a hit for us as well.
Yeah, you made a great point in that you are able to allow them to listen a couple times. These stories are primarily 3 to 5 or 6 minutes in length. Some of them are a little longer, but we're trying to deliberately keep them that length so that you can listen multiple times. Because I do think having that experience the first time and doing one activity and then listening again for another activity really helps students deepen their understanding of how listening is a multi-layered activity, and you can be listening for different things. If you are assigning a quiz on that story, let's say, you can talk through the students firsthand and say, listen for the main point. What is this story about? Listen for vocabulary words. You're going to be asked about some vocabulary. Listen for inferencing, and having them be ready for that and then take the quiz is a great way to do it. And again, in the remote learning situation, it's incredibly easy to just assign the quiz on any one of these lessons, as well as many of our current events. Every Wednesday, we are having a low-level current event, sort of an elementary-focused current event with a quiz. So I'm going to turn now to another story that I know you use, Jim, because I think that it's a great story that can tie into literature. So if you can talk a little bit about how, when you're talking about literature themes with your students, how you use Listenwise to bolster that experience.
Yeah, I've used the Listenwise as we've read this book, A Long Walk to Water. We're actually going to start this novel soon virtually, and students will actually be listening to the audio files. I've got them embedded in a Google slide deck. But more than just a really good story, I want to give them some context for this. So this is where I turn to Listenwise for that nonfiction, kind of historical context. We're reading about Salvadut, who was a lost boy of Sudan, who grew up to found a nonprofit that drills wells in Sudan now. And this story really set them up nicely for understanding that this is based on true events. This is a real person, and these are the people that he lived with for years as they were fleeing a civil war. So this really adds that nonfiction element to a literary component, and I love this story. I love this one quite a lot.
Yeah, this one always moves me because you're hearing directly from the person. And that's what's really, I think, unique about the stories we have on Listenwise, is that they're all nonfiction, fact-based, from the news. Often they've aired on NPR or a public radio station or a podcast somewhere. They are not created for educational purposes, but they are so incredibly educational and really bring together the real world with what you're teaching. That's what I'm hearing you're saying, Jim, is that like you're bringing the reality into it by using a story like this with your students.
And when we look at Common Core and the shift from fiction to nonfiction and the balance between the two, as students move up in grade levels, we see a heavier and heavier emphasis on nonfiction text. That doesn't mean that we should get away from fiction, but it does mean that we need to balance the two. And this is where a resource like Listenwise or outside websites. I know PBS has some wonderful websites and some video that goes along with this. I like the bundle Listenwise story.
So I also know somebody was asking, students do need accounts to be able to do the quizzes or this assignment. So it takes a little bit of time just to set it up, not much at all, creating your class, getting a code for your students, or if you have Google Classroom, it's super easy. And then your students are ready to go. But they do need that if you're going to do that. And I would recommend that for remote learning, because then you're able to, like I said, assign them a quiz as you saw, and they can see the results at the end. Oh, we've got some opera playing. Boy. All right, one last thing I'll show you, because I know we're at 6:30 and we're getting some great questions. Thank you so much. I know we need more lower levels. Somebody said, please add more. We are working as hard as we can. As I said, the elementary is in beta, which means that we are adding every week new elementary stories and current events. And we expect to have a full curriculum by this fall. So here's an example of a lower level story that is part of the current event. So you see, it doesn't have full resources, teacher's guide, and standards and such, but it has a lot of great questions to follow a good listen. And this is a story about a cat who was a cloned cat. And she died last week, at the age of 18, and it teaches a nice lesson about cloning and science, but wrapped in a great story about a cat. Let's just listen to a little bit.
The world of science has lost a pioneer.
Some people named her Copycat, some carbon copy, some clone cat. As far as I'm concerned, her name is Cece.
So it's just a fun story. So I encourage you to look at current events, especially any current events that are on Wednesdays, and have this quiz attached to them, because they're going to be lower level for your elementary students. Jim, is there anything else? I'm thinking, what else can we? Let me go back to the presentation to give you a few more helpful resources before we sign out. And I realize I'm going to turn off my sharing screen for a moment while I go back to my presentation. Just give me a minute. Jim, tell me how you've used current events to help with your that your students like in the elementary grades.
With regards to listening, it's, of the moment, what's current, what's in the news. It's easy to go shopping on Listenwise for stories like that. Sometimes I hear things in NPR and it's like, I wish I had that story right now. And sometimes I brought them in, but your library keeps going. I also love that Listen work with one resource, but I also find extra helpful value when you bundle it with something like a piece from Newsella, or maybe a video that's been enhanced by Edpuzzle. With listening, hearing from Edpuzzle, and with reading, so it's a 360-degree view, really deep view, really understand more.
Yeah, that is a great suggestion. We love app smashing. We love it when people use us with Flipgrid and Newsella, and we have a great blog on that. I know if you go to the Listenwise blog, you'll see some highlights on things you can do to app smash that are really helpful as well. So I'm just getting back into the presentation to just give you a few more links and things you can do, and know that parents can also sign up. So, if you're thinking about what can you do to give enrichment activities for your kids at home beyond, the official distance learning or e-learning, I encourage you to use Listenwise as a tool for that, because parents can sign up on listenwise.com and share a really fun story with their kids to talk about it. So that's another way to think about it, and have more of a student-led learning. And I should also say that students can, once they have an account, students are able to, let me just share my screen again to show you this. Once students have an account, they can also search for stories as well. Now, in the lower grades, I'm not going to recommend that entirely. Whoops, hold on, let me go back to this. It's loading. Okay. Here are some resources I want to share before we wrap up. But when students have an account, they can also just do their own search and listen to stories, and you could tell them, pick out a story that interests you, and then write me 2 sentences on it, or maybe record yourself and send it to me on a voicelet. That's another way to do it. So these are some blog posts about remote learning, and we have a parent enrichment guide. We have a more full guide on how to use Listenwise with remote learning. Tomorrow we're going to be doing another webinar podcast about podcasting with your students and how to make podcasts in a remote setting. And then on Thursday, we're going to be talking about using Listenwise with middle schoolers and high schoolers. So got a lot coming up, and we really hope to do this maybe on a weekly basis. If you think that'll be useful, love to hear what you thought in the chat, because we're just trying to find ways to support you and what you need. And if you think this is helpful and you want to come back next week and share what you learned or ask a question, we want to be here. So love to hear whether you've found this useful and would like us to do it again, because we would be happy to do it. And we can also send you all of these slides so that you can spend time looking at the links, etc. So like I said, tomorrow we're doing a webinar about podcasting with Soundtrap. That is a really, really cool online, it's cloud-based audio editing software that is free at the moment. And then you can always reach out to us. Tweet us at Listenwise Learn. What are you doing? How are you coping? Tell us your remote learning experiences. And you can also tweet right directly at me and Jim, or email me and ask for any other additional questions. So really, it's been a pleasure to help you. I hope we've helped you in some way. And Jim, thank you. If you want to say a few last words, Jim.
Oh, just glad to see so many people here, kind of all pulling together, sharing resources, and trying to brainstorm our way through a really weird educational moment in history. This is going to help us transform, I hope, for the better and the stronger. But it's it's a little bit bumpy as we're going through this, but we've got a community, so that makes a difference.
That is so well said. I completely agree. We will make it through this together, and that's why we want to be here for you, to support you in any way that you need with your remote learning. So thanks so much for coming today, and happy to help you. Just let us know, and stay healthy and stay well. Bye-bye.